Dear members, we'll reconvene and we'll go to item 10, which is the City Centre Master Plan refresh. You'll find it on page 189. And welcome the cross-divisional team that's been working on this. And we'll show the motions first, and I'll move that, and Councillor Coombe will second. And then just draw your attention to the C and the D. And the staff will address the C and the D as well. We did have some discussion yesterday on the C and the D, and thank Auckland Transport and the Auckland Design Office for agreeing to the wording there. But I think I'll leave that in the hands of the staff. We'll go through that. But firstly, take the introduction from Tim Fitzpatrick from the Auckland Design Office.
Okay, tēnā koutou, katoa everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to be here in front of you today. I'll just introduce Daniel Newcomb to my right from Auckland Transport, Manager of the Strategic Projects. Joanna is here from Panuku Strategy. Also, Ta'ala from Senior Advisor from Māori Outcomes for the CPO at Auckland Council, and hopefully by now you know George from the ADO and myself from ADO. We are really honoured to be here back in front of you again today. This is presenting a plan that's been 3 years in the making, along with you. Why has it taken 3 years? It's not that big a document, and we're not that slow, but it's taken 3 years, been 3 years, because we started off talking with people. Before we started this plan, one of the projects in Waiparuru Gully itself and Te Tangaroa, it's the Grafton Gully Boulevard that started off with discussions with NZTA, with Ngāti Whātua, with Auckland Transport, Rail, Ports of Auckland, the Pāneo Business Association, RFA, the universities, and that was that was on a project that we actually started out from and came from their public arena, and was an idea that the public raised and we saw value into to explore collectively. That was one project. Beyond that, in the Waihoratu Valley, Queen Street, we've worked with Heart of the City from the beginning there, understanding and developing this plan, the Automobile Association, the residents group, which represents hundreds of residents in their mailing list and who they represent. These are groups that were chosen because they have large memberships of who they represent, who they feed out to and feed back into the development of this plan. The Auckland Automobile Association, with 300,000 members, also have a targeted consultation team of thousands. We met with developers, lead developers in the cities. We had Matt Lowry from Greater Auckland on our one of our reference groups representing that voice, those voices, Gen Zero. We had several young men and women who came along and participated and added to these plans as they developed. We went out to all the local boards, and in particular Iraqi and Waitemata local boards have been massively influential in this through the process. We went to the seniors panels, to the disabilities panels, and we've had maybe half a dozen Auckland Transport Group managers involved in this from the beginning, whether it's parking, walking, cycling, traffic management, strategy, and then probably double that amount of subject matter experts inside of council, whether they're heritage, planning, Te Waka Angamua, ourselves, and then we've been along this journey with yourselves and the input that you've had and shaped this along the way. Finally, and I guess most significantly, at least my feeling in the new plan is that this time we've gone along with the backing of the 19 iwi from the Manawhina Kaitiaki Forum, which I think is significant in this refresh. So this is your plan. This is not. We're going to talk about consultation today, and we're going to talk about there were 500 responses in here, and please don't let people say, well, 500 responses is insignificant statistically, because before we even went there, and you asked us to go and see what people wanted, this is your plan. This is our plan, and this is where it's come from. That's why this has been 3 years. So I'm just going to say I've been absolutely privileged to be entrusted with this role in developing it. Love him or hate him, Ludo entrusted me with this and had the faith for me to lead this role here. To yourselves again for supporting us and challenging us and adding to this plan along the way. And again, to those who hold mana in this area for entrusting us with this work. We're absolutely grateful. I'm going to pass over to George to summarise this latest feedback in the last of the consultation phases.
Thank you, Tim. To carry on from here, we've had an introduction. Thank you, Tim. And I'm going to just run us briefly through the timeline of the City Centre Master Plan refresh, summarise what we discussed at our workshop last month, and talk a bit about the next steps for the vision for the city centre. And I mean, as Tim started to say, I mean, this really got going back in 2018 when Planning Committee gave unanimous support for a digital light touch refresh of the 2012 City Centre Master Plan to be led by the Auckland Design Office with support from Auckland Transport and Panuku and the rest of Council family and the rest of the city centre partners and stakeholders, shaping the vision with new material, Māori outcomes, and I'd like to acknowledge the generosity of the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum, who's graciously given their time and insight to shape the city centre vision. New material, a new urban precinct at the edge of the city centre, 2/3 the size of Wynyard Quarter potentially, centred on a better boulevard connecting the east of Auckland to the rest of the country. Access for everyone, improving the functionality of city centre streets for moving people and goods and allowing the city centre to flourish, and integrating the waterfront plan into the city centre master plan for an integrated city centre and waterfront vision. And following this resolution, we shaped this material with input from partners, stakeholders and subject matter experts, as Tim has alluded to, across Council, Auckland Transport and externally, getting direction from Planning Committee via a series of workshops in early 2019. And in July 2019, Planning Committee unanimously instructed us to take this refreshed material out for wider engagement, incorporating the new material into a series of new outcomes, transformational moves and zero emissions area as part of Access for Everyone, taking it out for wider engagement. And we were asked to report back to Planning Committee in early 2020, which we did at last month's workshop, which brings us to today's Planning Committee meeting here. At the workshop in February, I summarised the findings from the 3 stages of consultation and engagement, the main themes of feedback and how we've used it to refine the City Centre Master Plan. I mean, fundamentally, people support the vision of the City Centre Master Plan refresh. There are no fundamental changes to the nature of the master plan based upon consultation received. As Tim mentioned, this is merely the latest stage in about 3 years' worth of engagement. Really, Aucklanders want to see it happening. At the workshop, we had representatives from Auckland Transport, New Zealand Transport Agency and Ports of Auckland, and the CEO of Auckland Transport, Shane Ellison, gave a presentation about Auckland Transport's role in the delivery of the master plan vision. And Shane emphasised that safety is really a key priority for Auckland Transport, along with mode shift, and that access for everyone is a real mechanism to transform city centre access, where initial scoping has commenced and more work will follow, alongside applications for funding and cooperation on communications. AT is working on travel demand management, TDM systems, to make our transport system more efficient and user-friendly, and there are opportunities to pilot quick wins. And then this led into discussion, and we talked about understanding the need for transport investment to really underpin the vision for the city centre. We talked about political risk and the need for clear, coordinated and well-resourced communications around the city centre. We talked about the functionality of roads and streets and movement networks for people and goods. We clarified that access for everyone is not to do with beautifying the pavements or aesthetics versus functionality. Access for everyone is specifically about the functions of the city centre transport system. We talked about the number of consultation responses, the fact that the 542 public responses in many cases represented feedback from organisations such as the New Zealand Automobile Association. It represents 335,000 Auckland members. The Auckland Business Forum, which represents 8 separate organisations with a collective membership of over 500,000. Heart of the City, Parnell Business Association. There is a lot of membership level feedback that's gone into the city centre master plan consultation. We talked about the fact that council has asked about people who need to drive. There's a common misconception that access for everyone is about delivering a zero-car city centre. That's not true. The current estimate is that about, based upon AT figures, about 3 out of 10 people who want to drive into town during the morning peak will need to use a different mode or a different time. The remaining 7 out of 10 are fine. And this frees up road space for transport that really needs it and allows many more people to get to the city centre and get around the city centre overall. We were asked if Queen Street pilots can happen earlier. AT and Council agreed that a programme of pilots should look at what can be done as soon as possible to deal with the issues that we have now: piloting improved city centre goods delivery, public transport priority, and temporary changes to the road configuration. The city centre has never needed to function as a residential neighbourhood before as it does now, and there was support for the change in the city centre master plan outcomes to make this stronger, including provision of a city centre state school, which was mentioned by Richard Northey in relation to Waitemata Local Board's submission earlier this morning. I'd like to acknowledge specifically the contributions received from Waitemata Local Board and Uriki Local Board. They both provided formal feedback, and we've incorporated that into the master plan and how we go on to deliver the vision. And the workshop really recognised that this is about the city centre's relationship with the region, and that access for everyone is also important as a regional move and at a national level too. The city centre is 0.08% of Auckland's land area, but it accounts for more than 7% of the New Zealand economy, and it affects all of New Zealand. And this really brings us to today's planning committee meeting, the conclusion of a rather long city centre master plan refresh process. You've asked us to develop material for consultation, and we have. You've asked us to consult, and we have. You've asked us to provide feedback, which we've done, and you provided further feedback on February's workshop, and we have incorporated this. We would like you to endorse these outcomes, transformational moves, and access for everyone. They represent a lot of engagement, and they underpin a compelling and well-supported vision for the city centre and waterfront, They're also consistent with the Auckland Plan and the Unitary Plan, thus delivering the politically and publicly endorsed vision for the city within the city centre about delivering a city centre that's inclusive, connected, sustainable and welcoming to everyone. And following the refresh of the city centre master plan, we would enable the city centre and by association all of Auckland and the whole of the country to flourish. What are the next steps? The digital master plan website goes live at the end of the month. We work with our partners on long-term planning and delivery. Auckland Transport is already working on a comprehensive plan for access for everyone, looking at a 10-year horizon and also quick wins as soon as possible. And following endorsement of the high-level waterfront vision within the City Centre Master Plan, Panuku will be updating details of the waterfront plan and will be back in front of this committee later this year. So to conclude, we've updated the vision for Auckland City Centre, working with a huge number of partners, stakeholders and contributors. We really thank you for your support. There's meant to be another slide there for this vision and for its ongoing delivery. So thank you very much indeed. And that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Members, the re-elected chair of the City Centre Advisory Board, Viv Beck, she had to make a submission in Wellington today, so apologies from her. She couldn't be here, but she has presented us with a submission in support of our decisions today, and that has been distributed and again tabled here. Now, before we go to questions, there were some early questions lodged yesterday and again this morning from Councillor Simpson and myself. Are you in a position where you could go through those questions first and then we'll go to other questions?
Certainly, I'd like to refer to Daniel, who can answer them mainly in relation to transport. So over to you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you to remind me what those questions were. If you want, you can summarise the questions that you raised from the email.
So have you got them in front of you?
I do have them here. And the first one was about the fact that we're going to spend the next year doing the detailed investigation into the implementation of A4E. And I guess the summary of that is, why don't we wait until we've completed that before we go forward? From our perspective, we've done initial work already on A4E and what it would take. So we're in a position to say it could be done. That's the 10-year horizon George just mentioned. So we're now into the detail about how to actually do it and what the actual funding and what stages will be done. So there'll be ongoing work indefinitely on this program, but we've got sufficient to underpin the adoption of the master plan at this point.
Thank you. Okay, maybe just to give you some time to read the other questions, because there were some other questions that you did raise. George and Tim, could you go to maybe the questions I raised about the... we're about to, hopefully in the next couple of months, sign off the climate action framework, as it's termed currently. How would that be reflected in the City Centre Master Plan, which we're adopting now? Can it be digitally updated to reflect the Auckland Climate Action Framework?
Yes, so the City Centre Master Plan at the date includes embedded within the Access for Everyone plan, one of the flagship actions of ACAF, which is the zero emissions area. It takes it a bit further. That starts to look at how the work that Panuku and ports are doing might combine into, and that's one of the flagship actions. The outcomes that are already inside of the master plan speak to the values of ACAF, but as ACAF develops, we recall that the digital master plan has the opportunities for rolling updates, and that there was the opportunity for the planning committee to engage with and helping direct those updates as they come up. So formally, where we look to refreshing on a 6-year plan, that doesn't need to happen. Rolling updates can be included.
Thank you. Other question I had, the waterfront plan is coming into a single plan, so we're viewing it holistically. Can you just take us through how that stitches in to this plan in a meaningful way? And the second part of that question is, how does the updated city centre master plan, with that waterfront plan incorporated, how does it create the room for us to think about the future of the waterfront? And I'm thinking about those in our community who might be proposing a stadium plan or a cultural centre or a magnificent landscape. How do we receive those ideas and process those ideas through the city centre master plan that we're confirming? Because at the moment we tend to ideas. We've just lost the sound.
Thank you for the question. Panuku, as you know, has been the inheritor of the waterfront plan since its establishment. Many of the actions, all the goals from the waterfront plan were incorporated into this update of the city centre master plan. And like all the other components in the transformational moves, we're now into the next level of detail for planning. How those will be delivered and implemented. So in particular, this first round of planning that we're bringing back to you will focus on Wynyard Quarter, which is effectively West Haven to Hobson Street, let's say. And so we will be coming back to you with the issues that we're addressing, the engagement that we're pursuing, and then opportunities for you to have some input into that particular planning. So what we signalled in the City Centre Master Plan was picking up on decisions that were made 2 or 3 years ago prior to the America's Cup. What we come back to you with is more detailed planning on that and how we're going to engage. Back in 2017, you approved a whole lot of work around a Central Wharves strategy, a cruise strategy, and all the rest of it. Clearly, with the current political environment, that is changing, and I'll let Megan just answer that question of how we're going to address all of the ports issues and ports land in the coming year.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yes, we do know that things are changing. Around that, you'll know that officials are advising the Minister around the Upper North Island supply chain study that came up, and that advice is going through in kind of May and June, and you have raised concerns about that study and what it could mean for the future of the port and the fact that it needs evidentially based advice to go up and decisions to be made. So we will also be working with Panuku and across the organisation and its family to look at that wharves area and the port, but it does determine through some of these other various processes going through as well. So while the master plan won't see any particular change right now, we'll continue to do work and we'll update it as needed, and that will come through this committee and others if it's coming from a kind of a government perspective as well.
And just a couple of others, the Albert Park tunnels are now referred to in the City Centre Master Plan as opportunities?
Yes,
or as an opportunity?
Yes, they are. So they identified a number of partners in this work have seen great value in the potential of this, in particular, more so as much as about the connectivity it provides to the area of that Marutuahu have into the east, Ngāti Whātua as well, and the connection and the land development potential of that area is the proposal which looks at how do we release that land, how do we develop it. How does public transport connect to that as part of the planning as opposed to an afterthought? And how does it actually play part of the solution to us trying to find the right location for public transport when, and particularly a bus interchange, when we know that people don't want it right in the squished down into the waterfront. So this provides a great opportunity. That connection, the potential of that connection of that idea is recognised by those those people, and also RFA as well, and their interest is having a massive potential public access, which we have a city that's got a finite number of access into it. We have a ring road around it, and if we can increase one more, that's really massively significant. So, we understand that it's an idea, it's a proposition, and the master plan captures this interest in the potential of it.
Now to Councillor Deasley's questions that were written. Daniel, have you had an opportunity?
Sorry, I found them now. They're on the back of the page I was looking at. Thank you.
Go. Okay.
So this is in relation to travel from the east and how we can make sure that gets maintained in the future. I guess the main point is A4E isn't coming in tomorrow. The work we want to do will flesh out how we'll get it done. The work we need to do tomorrow is keeping the current travellers moving and the disruption that we've got with all the construction going on. We are looking to achieve some of that A4E outcomes as soon as we can, but how that will happen will be fleshed out over time. So we are working on communication campaigns and travel demand management campaigns and optimization work to try to improve what's out there at the moment, to give more information to travellers about when they should travel, where they should travel, different routes to take, different modes to take, different times to travel to get a better outcome. So that is more of an evolving piece of work that AT's taking on anyway as part of the city centre development and construction process now. The results of that and how well it works feed into A4E as part of the longer term planning for the city centre travel. So some of that will be making changes to the Strand, making the Strand a bigger, more efficient corridor for people who need to use it, in particular port access. And there was a question about when will that happen and how will they relate to the freight third rail line. So that the development of the Strand is an optimisation program underway at the moment, which will have freight lanes as part of it. That will help the freight keep moving. We also need to keep the traffic that's there moving as best we can too, and make it a safe place to cross as a person. So that's kind of going on anyway, and on top of that is the Grafton Gully Boulevard work that the AFE and the master plan envisages. The port traffic will be looking to use the rail freight more as the third line comes online, but there'll always be a lot of trucks that we have to deal with, and so we're trying to deal with them as efficiently as we can. We need to keep doing that with the Strand being more and more of a diversion route from the rest of the city centre, because we don't want traffic unnecessarily going through the city centre, so we have to be able to allow the eastern traffic to come around. That's why we've identified it as one of the projects we expect A4E triggers, a widening and an expansion of the Strand, because if you don't do that, you're just constraining the city centre with no bypass ability. So I think that's something that's come up over and over again. There was a question about Key Street and Custom Street. That will further impede the flow of movement along there. The full A4E closes off both Key and Customs as through routes for traffic. For people on public transport, walking, cycling, you can still pass through, and in maybe out of hours, you'll be able to drive through at night. But the bulk of the day, when the busiest times are, it would be no through route. You'd be able to come to and out of both sides of Key Street and Custom Street. That's the principle of A4E, but not through. How we do that, when we do that, is what we're going to look at for the next year. Hopefully that's answering enough of the questions.
I'll go to Councillor Simpson with any supplementary questions on that. That's fine, thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. A couple of questions. So what percentage of Auckland's economic activity is concentrated in the city centre? So we've heard New Zealand's figure, but what's Auckland's figure of economic activity?
About 19%.
Cool. So with the implementation of this plan, is there a risk that the CBD's economy will grow faster than other centres in Auckland and will outstrip town centre development in the suburbs?
I don't think it's a zero-sum game or anything like that, because of the fact that one of the aims of the city centre master plan is about strengthening its connectivity to the rest of Auckland. There's about 130,000 people that work in the city centre at the moment, and that number's going to increase. I mean, particularly when City Rail Link opens, doubling the number of people within a half-hour train journey of the city centre. Those are people that may work in the city centre but live all over the Auckland region. Secondly, there's the phenomenon of agglomeration, whereby the job density, the number of jobs, the number of people within a given area is increased. You get cumulative increase in the amount of GDP per employee. I mean, you see that in the City of London, you see that in Lower Manhattan, you see that in Shinjuku in Tokyo, all of these areas with extremely well-connected pedestrian networks supported by high-quality public transport. In Auckland, we're going to be seeing the same on a more Auckland scale. I mean, in relation to the business case for walking, which we conducted 2016, 2017, that there is more mathematics behind that, and that was based upon Melbourne methodology. So, I mean, I think the point is that the city centre is the centre for Auckland, but also for the whole of the country. A strong city centre is essential for the rest of for metropolitan centres, for the rest of the region to flourish.
Thank you, and I reserve my right to speak because my ward will be particularly interested in the agglomeration discussion. But I've got one more question, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Can you talk me through a bit more about the financial implications? Do we have an indication of what this is all going to cost and how we're going to pay for it? Can you kind of talk to us a bit more about that?
Just thank you. The first point I just make on that, just to round out George's point there. One was our former chief economist spoke often about the city centre, and that it's our only city centre, and it's not the investment that comes in from in terms of overseas investment comes to the city centre or to Sydney or Melbourne or overseas. So it's not it's not in competition. That's a significant portion of that is the $1 billion of projected investment, $1 billion per year for the next 10 years. Having a plan that coordinates that and sends to that international community that we are serious about maintaining access, that they can come and invest, and we will optimise routes for that, is really economically significant. That is the single most highest investment into the city centre. And Sir George's former point, I guess the opportunity cost is really important to consider as well, because there has been some numbers that have come from our initial understandings of what might happen, what we might require in 10 years. However, the business case for walking, which was a internationally peer-reviewed document done by Remo, estimated that the GDP benefits from agglomeration, from doing Queen Street as a transit mall, are $250 million per year every year, right? So that's significant. Remembering when that land value, that we're increasing that land value to be really, really high productive, that high productivity land supplements both national and local rates to meet our rates targets. So those are all considerations in it. The final point on what does it cost, yes, we've understood that in 10 years, if we want to do many of these things that we need to do anyway, because if we do nothing, remember, a no plan still doesn't deal with the problems we have. Those costs are what we understand over across 10 years in the consideration of those opportunity costs. However, Auckland Transport have a fantastic transport design demand management lead, Lucy Millier, who's familiar with the scale of soft works that was done around the Olympics planning. And those benefits saw the sorts of reductions in peak hour that we are looking for just from better communications, better shift, better other ways at looking at how you shift that demand that aren't just purely infrastructure. And when we start to understand that, those are things that don't necessarily cost that sort of money. Equally, that 10-year plan, to get a lot of the benefit out of A4E, you can do much sooner and much quicker and much cheaper. And inherent in the plan of this is an implementation strategy that says, if you treated the amount of change and disruption that we're dealing with now in the city, that's equivalent of that sort of event. And if we saw this as a Rugby World Cup, and that's what we're having, we would have fan trails, we would have fan zones, we would have events, and we would do it quick. And we would have a city that is done cheap, done now, and has give back right now, and is dealing with some of the issues that we're facing right now, rather than saying we might look at those post-CRL.
Sorry, my question wasn't actually answered, sorry. What are we talking about, finances? What would be, I appreciate we're early in the game, but is there any kind of indication that you could provide at this early point? What would be a expected outlay, and where would that money come from?
So the only costs that have been estimated so far have been the transport infrastructure ones to support A4E, and those were in the realm of $400 million of some pretty big motorway changes and changing the strand. As Tim was saying, when we do the investigations into this in detail, we're hoping to find other ways of achieving the same outcome with less spend. Having said that, we are going to put cost placeholders, I guess, into the RLTP to seek that funding for the future, because we need to have, an opportunity to seek funding going forward. So that will go into RLTP. There'll be things going into the LTP, and then our respective organisations can prioritise that as they wish. We'll be doing the work to back that up. We'll be doing business cases to back that up. But as Tim and Georgia said, we are also looking at quicker, more earlier implementation pilots, which will be cheaper and not nearly as significant financially.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Casey, please.
The people of Auckland are really keen to claim back Queen Street from the car, and throughout this process, the public has been universally supportive, as has this council and mayor. I'm delighted to see C, but why can't we do a small pilot, which by definition is a test of an idea, and have full pedestrianisation by March 2021 to coincide with the Victoria and Albert work? So that's my question. A quick trial,
Yep.
and then a year. You've got a year to do it.
So the reason we can't go full pedestrianisation yet is because of all the diverted buses that we're going to have from CRL works and other diversions that are going on. So we've got a lot more buses there at the moment than we'll have in the longer term. And so that's a temporary thing. So that's why we've pitched the March next year, when another big bus shift happens. So that's the time that a change would happen. We also know that we've got a lot of diverted traffic trying to get around the same problems that the buses are trying to get around. We also know we've got a lot of properties that need to be serviced, taxis, loading, tradespeople, whatever. There's no driveways to access on Queen Street, but there's a lot of properties to access. There's hotels and things. So we've looked at this in the past, and the complete removal of traffic is really hard to do. We can certainly reduce and minimise that as much as we can, and that's the pilots that we'll be pursuing and towards the March kind of deadline. And that switch of buses and traffic in March for the Victoria Street closure is going to be a good trigger for us to actually come and make a change. Trying to do that separately is going to be tricky. If we can piggyback on that other change and the consultation and engagement that goes with that publication of material, then that's what we think is a good milestone to go for. We're also working with NZTA on more flexible rules to allow us to close roads without as much palaver, I guess you'd call it, where we've got to engage with a lot of people of a lot of time, and it's quite a costly thing to do. Every time we shut down Queen Street, it's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 before the traffic management planning we've got to do, the road cones and things. So if we can find cheaper and more flexible ways of doing that, we'll be much more able to do pilots much more nimbly, and that's what we'll be trying to work out over the next year.
What you're saying, Daniel, is we'll still have cars on Queen Street for another year.
fully intend to start piloting as soon as possible through the year. Critical, one of the approaches that we want to take on that is the learnings from High Street, right? Which was a co-design process, which was a wonderful process, and take those learnings. It's going to upscale it, but to bring people along with us on this process. So not do it to people. We've got a clear vision of where we want to go to. We've got a clear mandate on that now. So work with those people, step it through, and start doing those programs, as you say, through the year, leading to that goal of when America's Cup's happening and when the next big change in CRL is happening. So yes, we do intend to do that.
Now, thanks, Councillor Casey, for putting that passionate plea for pedestrianisation of Queen Street at the outset. And that's what's been considered in the C eventually. I've gone through this with the staff, and if you look at the rerouting of buses in the last week and the load placed on the Wellesley to Victoria section of Queen Street, it's just bus jam through there in the AM peak. I have finally understood the challenges that Auckland Transport have, but I've also got a very clear message from not just Daniel, but the Chief Executive and the Chair of an absolute determination to achieve the C. Absolute commitment. And I want to make sure there's some suggestion on social media, etc., that Auckland Transport aren't on board. I have only heard a very committed Auckland Transport to achieve what I think all of us want to achieve here in the Queen Street Valley, the Waihoratu. And the second part to the C, there is a real determination to realise that. Just as we've seen it realised on High Street and the High Street extension, which will be completed tonight and open tomorrow, I think it is. So just a clarification from the Chair there, thank you. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And I do take what you just said then, but I do sort of feel Groundhog Day-ish on the Queen Street discussion. The Victoria Linear Park, other things. And now I worry with the Strand and other suggestions coming in, which are very expensive NZTA focus plans, that they're just, and I'm not saying this is the excuse coming from the table in front of us, but they just feel like another delay or another massive hurdle that we have to put in front of us to push this further down the road. So my question is, why aren't we talking more about the people movement still? We're just not doing it. We're talking about the cars. Queen Street's gone from 20,000 cars 10 years ago to 10,000 cars today, but the pedestrians heading towards 200,000. So we're just not giving the space. I understand 175 buses an hour is very difficult to deal with, but why aren't we stopping the cars? Why are they? I understand deliveries, but we're still not stopping. So for me, it's like, just do it. It's been the most supported thing for a very long time. We can't say that. I think John Tamahere was the only person who didn't support pedestrianising Queen Street of anything ever. So for me, there's that question. Why can't we just do it? Second one is my second question is, how do we make it happen in a way that connects to everything else? Like, I feel like the traffic management, and I've talked to Tim about this, traffic management costs for everything we're temporary closing that we may close in 4 or 5 years' time is going to be extremely costly to do all this traffic management constantly, where we could just be closing things permanently. So, and this isn't, most of the stuff has been planned for 5 to 10 years now, that's happening now. I just wonder, where is it sitting, and how can we just get some stuff done? Because we're actually sending people around in circles and then opening things up again. Wyndham Street's extremely dangerous again, and there was almost no traffic there for 4 years, and now we've got, so.
Then you might want to answer further, but look, a really big part of today and endorsing the plan today to say that this is the direction allows us to wholeheartedly and with full commitment now move forward, and that has been a stumbling block for some people that say this is not yet endorsed. So I've had some Actually, I've had some really good discussions with Councillor Desley Simpson, really productive, and thank you, and understanding those needs, and make the clarification that we haven't yet endorsed A4E, and we don't have A4E. What we have at the moment is what you get without A4E. And so endorsing it today is a really significant step in enabling us to go full out on this.
Probably questions for Daniel then. I guess, are we seeing the Strand discussion and others as a barrier to further? And the other thing, so we talk about the buses, there's a bit why we can't pedestrianise Queen Street, but surely the cars, and I see them every day, 3 or 4 single occupancy vehicles blocking 4 to 5 to 6 buses with 60 to 90 people in it. So we're getting 3 or 4 cars turning left or right, blocking 1,000 people or 500 people. We're just not, like, if we talk about people instead of vehicles, it's 5 people blocking maybe 500 people and delaying them. Like, how do we change the conversation? Because people will get it, because most people need us to change.
Yeah, sure. So just quickly to the Strand thing. So those large, expensive, difficult-sounding projects aren't being put up as a barrier. Those are things we worked out for the entire A4E in its entirety to be completed within 10 years. You would need something like that. It's not to say we need that. We wouldn't do anything until those are in place. So from the moment this plan's endorsed, then we're starting working on it, as Tim has just said. So we are hoping we can do more of A4E, almost all of it, without those things being put in place. But our initial investigation, so you need some big changes to parts of the network to make it all work. So we could do as much as we can without them. As soon as we get those in place, we can go to the full outcome. So they're not intended to put off or become a barrier to delivering A4E. A4E starts happening from the moment the plan's endorsed in smaller and incremental ways, but the big shifts do require big stuff, and one of those is more public transport capacity. So if you want a bunch of people to get out of cars and onto public transport, you've got to provide the public transport. So that will take time and money and space to provide. And then I guess moves on to Queen Street. So you've got a lot of people in buses down Queen Street. We've got a broken up network at the moment. Some of the people who are coming through in a car on Queen Street have to use it to get to a part of nearby. We're hoping you'd be pretty foolish to drive down there if you didn't have to. So by sheer human behaviour, we should be deterring people from driving places they don't need to be. There are better routes to take. But the work that we're heading into with the pilots is explicitly aiming to find ways of preventing people accidentally getting there. So if you really need to get there to go to a place just off Queen Street, you'll still be able to do that. We don't have a legal mechanism to stop that yet, and we'll be challenged on that by some of the businesses there. But the discretionary traffic that doesn't need to be there, a single occupant vehicle that could have gone somewhere else, that's what the pilots will be seeking to kind of filter out increasingly over time. And then eventually we'll get to nearly fully pedestrianised space.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr Chair. Some questions through the Chair, and I just want to make sure I reserve my right to speak to this. Kaupapa, because it's very significant. Just before I ask my questions, just to acknowledge the unsettling time for everybody in the ADO. And thank you, George and Tim, for fronting up so professionally. Really appreciate all the work from everyone that has gone into this, bringing this to us today. So I have a couple of questions for Daniel, and maybe I'll start first though with my question for Tim. With the city centre master plan that was minted in 2012, that was a unfunded plan, but do you know how much of it has been delivered that was using the city centre targeted rate? And is the city centre targeted rate the majority of what is funded, what has been delivered so far? And would it be your view going forward that that would actually fund quite a significant amount of what is proposed?
Thank you. The target rate, look, a simpler answer rather than a too technical answer is that a lot of what people see in the city centre, the shared spaces and those sorts of things that people associate with spending in the city have come from targeted rate. That's the rate that's paid in the city, not general rates. General rates, there are no, within the city, outside of the, obviously, clearly the amazing work that's happened in the waterfront space in Wynyard, there hasn't been huge funding to city centre master plan per se. It has come from targeted rate. Going forward, we all know that there is no money splashing around and that we need to be much, much more diligent about how we spend our money. So the new plan specifically has targeted to say, how do you actually deliver a vision without having lots of spare cash in your back pocket? And that's where the discussion is around aligning the things that are happening. The disruption, Councillor Hill's mentioned that now. There's a huge part of any change is managing traffic, and guess what? It's happening right now. So using that now to implement change in a really, really cost-effective way to deliver, and remembering that we're not doing it for a temporary reason, but actually aligning that change to this vision is how the master plan is grounded. It says that stuff that's happening us, use that to deliver our vision. The platform for our vision, okay? It's not about the bluestone right now. It's about the needs of the city, the service, the delivery, the access from the east, better wayfinding. Those functional operational needs, we can do quick and we can do cheap using what's happening now.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for that. There's probably an offline, some information that could be given to councillors about how much has already been funded from the city centre targeted rate. So I'll leave that there. And if I may, Mr Chair, just a couple of questions for Auckland Transport representative. In the report, it's mentioned that Access for Everyone aligns with Auckland Transport's existing mode share plans. And I just wondered where those plans are and if we can have a copy of them, because I'm not aware of what AT is aiming for with mode share.
Yeah, sure. So that might be small p plan. The results of our work and current programs will get us to 65% PT mode share in the city centre within the coming decade. If we do A for E, we get up to 75%. So 3/4 of the people coming into the city would be on public transport, which is pretty good. So that's not a specified target. That's just what happens if we deliver the things that we're going to deliver. Having said that, the NZTA is setting a mode share kind of planning philosophy that we'll likely adopt, which will make put up targets that we will get to aim towards, and then they can prioritise funding to get you to those mode share targets.
Thank you. I think we need to have an ongoing discussion with the chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee as we finalise the climate plan as well, because we're obviously interested in those targets. And just my final question, it was almost kind of casually thrown in that we're going to need, I think it was 400 million for the Grafton Gully Boulevard and changes to the motorway network, and that will also involve road widening. And it raises alarm bells with me that we seem to still be talking about what Auckland Transport is predicting will happen rather than asking us what we would like to happen. And one of our objectives isn't just funneling the same amount of traffic through the city centre, and which is important to have those alternative routes, but we're also raising the conversation to say that we're actually going to travel less and we're going to travel smarter and we're going to travel differently. And so I'd like to understand where is that thinking in terms of what has been suggested to us, the predictions of what's going to happen and what's needed, and the certainty around those figures you gave us.
Sure. So those figures, 400 odd million, came from NZTA as a best guess for the information they had about what would it take on a per kilometre rate to widen the strand. So the actual cost will be different. We will work out what that might be as we get into the detail. But that planning is already based on a 30% reduction in traffic. So we're not planning for what's there now. We're trying to have less traffic. We need to have less traffic to make the plan work. The access for everyone philosophy, though, means that you can't go through the city centre. So all the traffic going to, through, and around the city centre from the east has to use the Strand in some way, unless they're going to the very northern part by the ferry building of Quay Street. All the rest of it has to go around. So even with less traffic, you've got more pressure on the Strand. So we think you'd need to widen the Strand to accommodate that. We will work out whether we can actually find other cheaper ways of having that traffic, or having traffic behave in a different way, or meter traffic or manage traffic, so we don't need to widen in some way. But we already know, and Councillor Simpson knows, there's a lot of pressure on the Strand already for freight and traffic going through there. So with the AFE, we put more pressure on that spot. If we wanted to not have to spend that, we would have to just reduce traffic further. So that's your target. Keep reducing traffic until you don't need to do these big plans. If to do that, you need to put more money and investment into public transport capacity. So you're taking money off a road investment, putting it in public transport, which might be a good thing, but it's still money to be spent. So we're going to come back to you with a whole lot of technical information about this to answer these questions. That's what we'll be doing over the next year. It is a little bit counterintuitive to have road widening proposals and a philosophically traffic reducing kind of concept. That just comes from the fact that our network is a little bit disjointed and not fully connected, and so this is pretty much connecting up those bits that are missing to enable us to achieve that car light or car free city centre.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the team that's put all the work into this. Today's paper, of course, is going to be about endorsing, or whether we endorse, the vision and the strategy of the City Centre Master Plan, not about the funding of it. But my questions still come back to funding, and I want to ask questions to elucidate what Shane Henderson and Pippa Coombe has said. My first one, because the big cost is the work on the Strand, Daniel, I want to come back to that. I'm trying to figure out that if we were to convert Queen Street into pedestrianised and public transport only, why would that put so much more pressure on the Strand that we would need to spend that money first, if that's the implication of what you've said?
Yeah, so it's not quite that. Those two aren't related. The Strand upgrade, increasing the capacity, relates to preventing any through traffic across the city centre east to west. So it's not about Queen Street as a pedestrianised space. So if you can't travel across the city centre, you've got to go around, which is the simple philosophy. You have to allow the Strand to have more capacity to enable that. And if you don't do that, you've just stopped people coming through but not helped them go around. And I think you would experience quite a lot of pain in the community, and the east would certainly let you know that had happened. So we've got to put more public transport on, and so people can convert to another mode and help them make a bypass of the city centre to achieve a better city centre out of that.
So just to clarify that, there's a whole lot of pieces that go together into the City Centre Master Plan, but pedestrianising and restricting to public transport Queen Street by itself wouldn't require the work on the Strand? Okay, that's good to have that clarification. The second thing is, obviously, we endorse the vision first, and that doesn't depend on funding, but implementation does. So this is a question really to the wider team. When are we going to have the full scoping of the cost of the different measures involved in the City Centre Master Plan, which will determine how quickly we can implement? Like Kathy Casey, I'd like to see it happen yesterday, but I understand that not only do you have to carry people with you, but you also have to have the funding to actually progressively and incrementally put the changes in place. So when will we get that? When will we get those figures, and do you have any estimate that you're prepared to give us now?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I was just showing Tim, we've got a city centre working group that is looking at exactly that, our entire LTP bid as it relates to the city centre across the whole council whānau. And someone just sent me a little thing suggesting that there would be council workshops starting in August on just that topic. And if you recall, about 3 years ago, we did exactly the same thing. We came back with a massive, great list of all the city centre projects. We kind of chunked them up, which ones were essential, which ones related to the spend on CRL, and you made decisions at that point. So we're just working at the moment to hoover up everything, create a cohesive story, and I've been told that that'll be workshopped by August of this year.
So through you, Mr Chair, just to clarify that, by August we'll have a better concept of what the costing will be. And of course, depending on the costing, we don't do the whole of the city centre master plan at once. We'll implement it over time and dependent on the funding that's available at that point. And we'll need to prioritise between different aspects of that plan. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Like, we will package stuff up if we think there's a logic in terms of timing or whatever, and then you will decide. And then, of course, that's one of your 5 lanes, I believe they're calling it, across the entire city for your LTP priorities. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mayor. Member Tauhenere.
Kia ora. Just a couple of questions, but first of all, can I congratulate George on your pronunciation of Waitemata. I remember the last time I had you up about it and there was a big furore. And the pronunciation of Waitemata is actually very, very hard, so I'm stoked. I'm sure you are. My question revolves around ADO and the disestablishment and not wanting to have that as an issue, but there is a lot of stuff that's gone on in terms of ADO and the relationship that it has with mana whenua and mātāwaka.
So could we,
Appropriate or?
I don't want to canvass a proposal from the management on an organisational restructure here,
Yep.
but if it relates to the ADO as it is and mana whenua mātāwaka, you're most welcome to discuss that.
I don't want to ask about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But I want to know, because of the disestablishment, what happens?
No, there is. So look, there is a proposal, and look, I probably would prefer an offline discussion with the Independent Māori Statutory Board. I'm having a meeting regarding what you're expressing concern for tomorrow.
But you don't know what my concerns are, because I haven't asked them.
No, if your question relates to the Auckland Design Office and its relationship with Mātāwaka and mana whenua, if we can narrow it down to that, we're good to proceed.
Well, you're only going to find that out when I ask it. So there are relationships between ADO and IMSB, and relationships with Mātāwaka and mana whenua. Relationships that have been worked on for quite a bit of time. What happens to all of those relationships and work that has been done, and where does it sit with the disestablishment? Because my worry is, where does that, I suppose you could...
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt Tauhenere, a member.
Go for it. It's the third time, but that's okay.
I would prefer we homed in on the paper before us. I'm hearing your concern. I've heard it from other members as well, and I'm taking up that concern as chair of the committee, which treats with the Auckland Design Office probably the most. So I would prefer if we can bring the focus to the paper before us.
It is.
Okay.
How can they answer my question about the design if I'm not sure of all of the work that Mātāwaka has done, mana whenua relationships that ADO have created over the last however long? How can I get around that?
I hear you.
Okay, I'll ask another question. And it relates to the question that Councillor Hills asked, and also Councillor Pippa asked about cars on Queen Street. I think we're being sold a pup about, because I don't think you answered the question properly. And they weren't talking about buses, they weren't talking about delivery, they weren't talking about essential vehicles like an ambo or a fire truck or a cop. What they were talking about was the car. You know, me driving my beautiful ute down Queen Street between Merrill Drive and the bottom of town. I mean, I'd be stupid to anyway. Why can't we start a pilot by the end of this month saying no to vehicles, no to cars, my cars, your cars, the public's car. I know what you said about you have to allow for access around the back, and if I was going to the dentist or want to go to a record store, to have record store still? Anyway, you know, I want to go to McDonald's down on Queen Street. But surely to goodness, and especially after former councillor Northey came this morning and said 41 years ago, and that really did rock me. 41 years ago, he put a paper up when he was a councillor. I was still in my 20s. I didn't even have a car. And we can't do a pilot this year, this March, saying, and putting up a sign, from here, you are not allowed to drive your car down Queen Street. I'm gobsmacked.
Yep, sure. So that we did look into that in a lot of detail the last, 2018, I think it was, we did a last kind of comprehensive look at that. So our difficulty is the bylaws and the statutes that we have to follow. We can put in a bus lane, we can put in a shared space. What we can't, we can do a pedestrian mall as a designation. What we're not legally able to do at the moment is say this car but not that car. We could put it in, but we couldn't enforce it. We can't define the types of cars that you're talking about. We can only define a bus, we can define a time. So that's why I mentioned about changing the rules so that we can do what you're asking. We can't do it legally, or we could do it and not enforce it, and then it becomes no one follows the rules. So I think we've been trying to achieve what you've just described, only allowing in taxis, servicing, loading that need to be there, but cutting out that other traffic. Our legal advice is that we don't have the bylaws, the rules to do that. So we're trying to get the rules to do that, and then as soon as we do, that's when our pilots begin.
Can you, then last question, can you give me your legal opinion? Can you give me that legal opinion? And given that you have a legal opinion, how do we change the law to enable that? And third, can we do that as soon as possible? I think, and I suppose what I'm getting at is after 41 years, we have to wait another year because we can't change the law. For goodness sake, you're all councillors. You can do anything. You can change a bylaw. Just do it.
So look, it's a political question, really. It's a hard one for Daniel to answer. And as chair of the committee, I'm absolutely determined to see the transition work occur as soon as possible, and for that big outcome to be delivered as soon as possible. There are legal obligations here. I've gone through this with the staff, and there are property owners there who have a right of access. We have to negotiate that with them. We did that on the High Street trials. We negotiated it, and that's why this period of negotiation that we've learned from on High Street, and that's why the success of High Street is sticking. That's why we've got people knocking on the door telling us, move faster, get up to Durham Lane, get up to Victoria Street with the High Street trial, because they are seeing the success They were previously opponents. So we are going there, and I hear what you're saying, and we will go there as fast as we can, and it's for us politically to demand it, and we will.
As fast as you can, 41 years. That's really quick. But that's cool.
Councillor Walker.
Two short questions, and I reserve the right to speak. Does the city centre refresh process allow the possibility of extending the Dockline tram further around the Wynyard Quarter and also across to Quay Street?
Yes, it does. It's not specific about the transport solutions to achieve the outcomes for AFE. I would just note that the tram forms a big chunk of the Wynyard Quarter travel plan, transport plan, I think it is. And so we would have to coordinate between Panuku, Auckland Transport and Council in terms of where that sits and its role the tram plays in the public transport and the design of Wynyard and Te Wero kind of area. So that will be in our investigations into how we move more people around with fewer vehicles.
Related question, would it also help to address some of the issues that Councillor Simpson is raising, particularly around this east-west movement, enabling mobility across to Wynyard from Britomart and vice versa?
It depends where it connects to. We also know the historic tram is not a very accessible vehicle, so it wouldn't be something that AT would normally operate because it doesn't have the access and safety requirements we have of our vehicles. So it's quite hard to get on the pram, for instance. So we wouldn't normally run it as a public transport vehicle. Having said that, better access east to west by public transport is the core of what we have to do, and so we will definitely include that in our investigations.
The other question is around the impact on businesses going forward. We know that we've got some history currently with the CRLL and the like. Are we going to have a plan going forward addressing business disruption and opportunities for all of this, A for E, Queen Street and so on?
So at the workshop, the chief executive of AT spoke about the fact that one of the core success factors of whatever we go into is about engagement and consultation up front, not delivering something to the business community. And that was very much based on the feedback we've had from transport projects and construction projects generally about the impact that has on businesses and business access. That's another reason for Queen Street being quite difficult to do, because we don't want to be seen to be making it harder to do business in Queen Street in some way. So I expect, as part of developing our A for E plans and the wider master plan, that will involve a great deal more engagement with the business community. And we're already doing that through Heart of the City and others. And the issues about construction and impacts will come up through that.
Thank you.
Member Nunley.
Kia ora. It is following on from my colleague, his question, but perhaps I'll pitch it another way. Our expectation is that Council's capability to deliver on outcome one and the transformational move, and in particular the application of high quality Māori urban design in the city, our expectation is that's going to be maintained and supported. And we can go offline with whoever we need to, Mr. Chair, to get some assurance that that capability will remain in place. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
That was a statement, sorry.
yes,
It was a statement. Yeah, not a question.
And I'll ensure that commitment remains as well. Councillor Simpson, did you want to follow up?
I'm just going to reserve my right to speak. Thank you. Don't worry.
Thank you. Any other further questions, members, before we make comment? Look, thank you to the team. It's a big team. I probably am thinking of Ludo Campbell-Reid being in the room here, ghosting around. All ghosts seem to be depicted as bald ghosts, so entirely appropriate. And Kit, nice to have you here. Maybe you're bringing a little presence of Ludo here, because I know a lot of this work was formulated when he was the urban design champion for Auckland over that long period. There's been a long lead in time. Look, I want to thank the Auckland Design Office for corralling everybody. You have been leading this. You've been really outstanding, and bringing Panuku and Ta'ala together, and Auckland Transport together, NZTA. So I recognise the way you've done that. You've done it as a really tight team, not as dislocated individuals. I just want to say thank you for the enormous effort that you have brought. And you've challenged us along the way. You've urged politicians to go further, and you've asked us to go further today and sign up to this. I think we will. And so thank you for that. You certainly are the envier of a lot of other cities that don't have such a go-to unit. So folks, this is a real fundamental change in what we're doing here in the city centre. We've talked about it, and now we are about to confirm by our vote that we are going to have a different vision for the city centre. So in between, we've signed up to take real action on climate change, being led by Councillor Hills and Councillor Coombe now. We've also signed up to address the toxic air quality, particularly in the lower Queen Street area, and we've got to take that on. And we've also signed up to shift gears on mode shift with the NZTA, a government commitment which Auckland Transport is, the board is about to sign up to, I believe. So that commits us on a number of new fronts, and that's what requires us to lift our game. So the acceleration of the transformation in some ways is already underway. The private sector, in some respects, is ahead of us. And while it's not a matter of us keeping pace, we've got to show our time for leadership, and that's what this does. And it's about that accessible, less congested city centre. It's about greening it with nature. It's about the Māori identity. Ta'ala, we haven't had the questions on that, but that is our differentiator. That makes our place, Tamaki, different to any other Copenhagen or Barcelona or anything. That Māori identity, cementing that in place and having it as a foundation and following through on the commitments that Member Ngamani and Member Hanere are emphasising are absolutely critical. And we will honour that, and we will track it right down. Great streetscapes, open spaces, we're on the way, but this is going to amplify it. There are 10 outcomes and 8 transformational changes, and we've given attention to 3, the Access for Everyone, Māori outcomes, and the Grafton area. It's a whole new form of connectivity, and it's a challenge because we're pretty adhered to our patterns. Our travel patterns are, for some, are really hard to break. Over time, I've managed to break and disrupt mine, and many, many thousands of Aucklanders are doing likewise. And in the city centre, we talk about numbers, we talk about congestion, but as the Auckland Transport Chief Executive told us at our workshop, a low estimate at the moment, there is some 500,000, 500,000 walking trips every day in the city centre. That is absolutely phenomenal. And my anecdotal evidence, and we all bring a little bit of anecdotal evidence, I'm a ferry user. I come out of the ferry terminal there at 7:30 in the morning, and I cross Quay Street, and I can tell you every 5 minutes there's another ferry coming in from somewhere with between 100 and 400 people on it, and they all cross Quay Street, and the number crossing Quay Street outnumbers those that are going along Quay Street by at least 10 to 1. But we think the big problem is the going along. We forget about that wave of people that want to move across. And they're not just people going to work, to learning, they're also the visitors going the other way to the islands, to Devonport and other destinations. It is growing at a tremendous pace. This accessible and less car-dependent city centre is something that most intelligent cities are looking at and embracing, searching for solutions. Our A4E is being recognised around the world. A lot of cities are studying this. And it's a challenge, yes, but didn't we have challenges over the last 10 and 18 years? And if you look at the numbers between 2001 and 18, we doubled the numbers of people taking public transport into the city. The government gave us an enormous challenge of hitting 93 or 94 million journeys by train, and PT numbers in total, and we hit that and went beyond. They thought they were going to test us with a number that we could not reach, and we went beyond, and we hit that target. In the city centre, we need to add another 50%. We've already doubled it 100% in 18 years. Now we need to add another 50. That's a plus 30 that's already planned, and then another plus 11 on that. It's not insurmountable. It's a challenge, yes. But to get there, and members, I know the urgency, and I know the frustration, and I know the desire to do it tomorrow, but to do this in the middle of the city centre of Auckland, we are going to have to throw our arms around each other, just as we did to achieve the High Street success. So collaboration is going to be absolutely key going forward. And I want to reiterate again that from the chair of Auckland Transport to the chief executive of Auckland Transport, I have only had, we will do it, Chris. And so I convey that to you. There is a commitment from Auckland Transport to make this happen. But of course, for them to make it happen, we are going to have to back up as well, because we've got a budget decision to make. So I'm ambitious for it. The handbrake's off and the transformation is on. Lastly, the pedestrianisation for Queen Street received a lot of support in the feedback, and that's where the C and D, the C particularly reflects that. There is the opportunity to do early pilot work, just as we did on High Street, and a lot more. So members, I commend all of these motions for your hopefully unanimous support, and let's bring some sparkle into the city centre. And again, I thank the ADO for taking us on this journey and landing us at this point today. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification about how we're going to vote. Are we taking one at a time or what? Because I'd like to take them one at a time, because I agree with some and don't agree with the others.
Okay, look, when we come to the vote, you can call that, or I'll take your note and I'll take them one at a time. Or maybe you can point out whether it's A, B, or C, and or you could record your vote against. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you.
Point of order, sorry, do I not get to speak first as the seconder? Okay, all right, sorry.
If you want to go
just local
first,
board
it's your ward, it's fine.
convention. Sorry, I'm just a newbie around this table.
I've got to speak.
I was wanting to pull rank too as the councillor for the city centre.
Yeah, if you please go first.
If the meeting would like Councillor Coombe, are you comfortable?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, look, before I get into some of my concerns, I do want to point out right up front that I support this plan, and I support it wholeheartedly. I think it is a vision for a modern city centre and a people-focused city centre. It will have good impacts on our climate change mitigation. It will do a lot of good things, and it'll be something that we can be proud of. However, in financial terms, we will have budgets to discuss and things to weigh up, and that is a competitive process. And I think at this point, we actually do need to talk about agglomeration of Auckland's economic activity. we have less than 1% of our area of Auckland taking on 19% of Auckland's economic activity. And that has impacts on our health, our well-being, and on climate change. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. Sorry. So this does have impacts, asking large amounts of our city to travel for work into a very small area, and the impacts that I've just described. We've just come from a very pertinent discussion, I think, where we're talking about a city where we have the haves and the have-nots. Now, we've also seen a prosperity report through ATEED, which came out, I think, last year or the year before, which suggests that those have-nots live in the south and in the west of the city. And so we're encouraging those people to move in greater numbers toward the centre for work. So all I'm pointing out to my colleagues is that we do need a plan to encourage growth, encourage events, encourage economic activities in the suburban town centres of the city to really get the impacts that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. Look, there's much I like about this plan, a lot, but I have a concern, and I have a number of concerns, and they come from the people that I have been voted in to represent. My main concern is the lack of east-west connection across the city when the decision for that to happen in a roundabout route isn't ours, it's NZTA's. I absolutely commend Auckland Transport. I'm just sorry that a lot of what was said in the workshop couldn't have been here today, because I thought the Chief Executive did an outstanding job at the workshop. And I support knowing the practical implications of what the whole refresh City Centre Master Plan will actually look like. And I suppose I've had a bit of experience because I've seen it, you know, when we looked at Quay Street, and I remember Bernard Orsman rang me up and he said, do you support Quay Street? You won't have, any bus or vehicle access east-west. And I said, don't worry, Bernard, they tell me that, Customs Street will be all there and it'll be fine. And of course, what happens, time passes, and of course that doesn't going to work as well. So I think one of the best things around this is Auckland Transport have been brave enough to say, give us 12 months to have a look at it. Look at the practical implications, and then we'll come back with you and tell you how it's going to work. Auckland at the moment is a city of cones. It's an absolute nightmare. And, to turn around and say we're going to disrupt it even further to do some of this right now actually concerns me, and I think would concern Auckland. Long-term outcome, fantastic, can get there. But, I absolutely, I would love to see Queen Street pedestrianised. Absolutely I would. But I have no idea, with all the mess that's happening on at the moment, what that would do to the people that currently have to use that route because they can't use anything else. So I want to see CRL operational. I want to see shake down all this work that's happening, see what that looks like, and then what is the priority, how much it would cost, one thing at a time. I'm just very nervous about signing up for something without knowing the practical implications. I don't want to rain on your parade, but we're about to hit, some serious financial burdens as well. We've got to look at this against, our park infrastructure and everything else. And so I'm sorry, I'm not going to vote for it, not because I don't believe intrinsically in some of the incredibly important things, but I do want to see the practical implications of that decision before I make the call. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
I raised some questions earlier. As they go to the Dockline tram, that is around enabling things that are already up and running, that may have alternative funding models and can deliver and shift people. So as much and all as we can talk about all of this big stuff, and there may be a prospect of light rail and so on, when we have projects that work, that can be modified to deal with issues around disability and access, and I know that is the case, and it is certainly evident with trams in other cities, then we should be seizing on those things and enabling the business cases around them to develop. So let's not ignore the low-hanging fruit. The other matter that I raised that went to the financial impact goes directly to the comments of Desley Simpson. I've got huge concerns around the ability of the business community to cope with the pace of change that we're looking at here. We need to have detailed plans around that so that they know what's coming, so that businesses can transition, because a number of them will have to transition, and a number of them, I might add, are probably hurting right now. We can't afford to lose those businesses. That is a vital concern, and it is also clear that we need to have the government on board, that we need to know about the funding that's going to be available there relative to Strand and so on. That's critical. So we've got a number of parts of the jigsaw here that need to fit together. Thank you.
Councillor Coon.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. As the seconder and as the councillor for the beating heart of Tamaki Makaurau, I would like to wholeheartedly speak in support of us adopting the City Centre Master Plan refresh and moving ahead with a pilot. Just remembering that we are building on the 2012 City Centre Master Plan, and that it's a document that I'm very fond of and was very involved with in the first term as a member of the local board. So what we're moving forward with, I think, is a really logical next step as we rethink what the city centre is about, as we're moving from a CBD. We don't have a CBD anymore, just officially, just an FYI, the CBD is only the area that the heart of the city has governance over. We now have a city centre that extends all the way from West Haven over to Parnell. And we're really rethinking what it means to have a vibrant, safe, healthy, welcoming city centre for people to do business, live, visit, linger and study. And I think it's quite significant that there's been a really broad church of support for this plan. It's come from the heart of the city, it's come from the Automobile Association, it's come from the city centre residents have said they absolutely endorse this. And also importantly, it's come from business. I just think it's worth reflecting that in our first term, the councillor for Orake said that he would never ever support anything happening to Quay Street because it had to be left wide open as a motorway for the residents of Eastern Bays. But you know what brought everyone to the table around rethinking Quay Street? It was actually Precinct Properties who said, hey councillors, we're going to invest $1 billion in your downtown. We would like a shop front that looks out onto Quay Street where people can sit and shop and admire the harbour. So that was the driver for change. And I distinctly remember the CEO of Precinct coming to, I think it was a committee meeting, and saying to everybody, this is going to happen with our investment, you have to do your part, city. And that's why Quay Street has changed. So the additional elements of this refresh, I think, are really logical and will add to our city centre. There's the Grafton Gully Boulevard, which Councillor Simpson and I walked the Strand on the weekend because that's our shared boundary. And this is actually a project that has been a long time coming, and it was endorsed by the Waitemata Local Board back in 2014. So it's an idea that's been progressing, and it's great to see it as part of the City Centre Master Plan. Access for everyone, of course, is something that I'm really excited to see happening, and how that's going to really transform our city centre. And there's some real gems also in the plan, new projects like the tunnel, the Albert Park tunnels, which are going to just add a whole new element to the city centre. And then, of course, the Māori outcomes part of the plan. It's really important that Māori outcomes aren't just a tag on, but they're absolutely implemented into everything that we're doing and planning, and that we actually see some of this place-based Māori outcomes and what they are. And it is far more than just a few more te reo names or bilingual signage. And one of the things I just want to flag that as we go back to the future with QE2 Square, that is going to be this amazing public space, and it's going to have, hopefully, a te reo name. So that's a piece of work that's coming. I do just want to speak to some of the concerns that have been raised, and not just around this table, but also through the consultation. One of them is equity, and we often hear that, you know, this is all the investment is happening in the city centre to the expense of the wider Auckland region. We touched on in the questioning around the fact that actually a huge amount of what's happening in the city centre is funded by the businesses that are located here and the residents. Should be remembered that the residents pay the targeted rate as well, and they're asking for these changes because they can see that it improves their quality of life. And a healthy, strong city centre benefits the wider region. We heard that a fifth of Auckland's GDP comes out of the city centre. 130,000 jobs are in the city centre. May I just quickly to just wrap up a few more of those other concerns. The one there's about the crosstown and what it does mean to the people, and particularly I know is a concern in the Eastern Bays. It is changing. We read in the Orake local board feedback that they love what's in the plan, but they're still raising the concerns, but we still want our crosstown travel to continue. That's gonna change. The way that we move around the city is change. And if we embrace it, it's going to be good for everyone, including drivers. Also, just the impatience that we heard that from Member Henare, and I do share that impatience of just seeing change. And what Member Northey mentioned, you know, 41 years in the making to have a pedestrianised Queen Street. And I do think of me being a teenager of the 80s who spent a lot of time on Queen Street, and the noise and the smell of Queen Street on a Friday night has not changed from the 80s. It's still the noise of revving cars, the Hare Krishnas, bless them that they're still there. But, you know, the city centre is a lot more people, a lot more buses, but actually it hasn't actually fundamentally changed the way that we can have it as a much more vibrant city centre on a Friday night if we implement access for everyone and make it a people-focused place. So just to end, this is my just summing up, so thank you for allowing me this time to speak in support. I do feel hopeful about where we are and about the opportunity for trials and pilots. We do want those to happen faster, but I do note the success of High Street and seeing people, showing people what we mean by what's going to happen, what pedestrian friendly means, and the success there by bringing everyone along, and that's so important. But why I feel particularly hopeful about the City Centre Master Plan refresh and the projects that we're going to implement together is that I feel that we are moving away from the model of Auckland Transport projecting and modelling our future and telling us this is what's going to happen, this is the number of cars that are going to come into the city centre, and therefore telling us what we have to build and widen. I think, notwithstanding the comments we had today, I think we are moving from that modelling of that Auckland was always based around. This is how many cars are going to come into the city, so this is how many car parks we're going to build. So what has shifted is absolutely fundamental. This is Aucklanders who have spoken really strongly through the feedback, through 3 years of engagement, and they've asked us as the governing body, and they're saying that they would like us, they've told us what they want the future to look like, they've told us what the choice is, and they're asking us to direct it to Auckland Transport and to our partners to deliver. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe and Councillor Watson.
Mr Chair, I'll try and be quick. I read a really neat post from former Councillor Mike Lee the other night about it was the 50th year anniversary of him coming to Auckland from Wellington with his wife. And one of the things Mike said was that the old Aucklanders, when he arrived here, and he spent quite a bit of time in the city, the old Aucklanders were always skiting about how great Auckland was, you know, what a great place it was. This was back in 1970. And he made the comment that the City Council and the ARA, as it was then, they just quietly got on with the job and did things. And his parting shot was that now Councillor Lee thought it's the other way round. And I think you can get a sense of that from some of the comments and the people in the feedback, not least of which is the one at 54 there. Among the highest supported moves, the most consistent theme was one of impatience. Respondents overwhelmingly support the idea of a pedestrian priority Queen Street and a Victoria Street linear park. And then, the plan sounded good, but just wanted to see progress and actual tangible results. And I think that's certainly something that has become apparent if you listen. Listen to people, and I thank for the officers for clarifying, the complexity to some extent with this as a whole, and their commitment to finding better routes for people to take. So we don't have a win-lose situation. We have a win-win situation where we get the city centre we want, but we also think about other people who have to do travel across town, and that can be done. I mean, we've got the Northern Motorway improvements going on at the moment, which is massive disruption. Now, theoretically, disruption, there is no disruption. So the way the traffic has been managed there has been no hold-ups. So it goes like clockwork. So these things can be done. They're not impossible. And if you look at some of the cities around the world, if you look at Buchanan Street in Glasgow, at the same time Councillor Lee was coming to Auckland, they were doing this, pedestrianising Buchanan Street and Argyle Street, and they were main traffic arterials that made Queen Street look like a backcountry lane. They did that. It's been an overwhelming success since the 1970s. Great for business. In fact, they had a partial shutdown for a while of the Buchanan Street from like 9 to 4:30, just keeping traffic out. Traffic was allowed in after that, but it was so successful that within a couple of years they'd gone for the complete pedestrianisation. So let's get on and do it. Let's be mindful, as we appear to be, of the needs of others in terms of cross-city travel. And let's also pick up Councillor Henderson's point about the wider Auckland impact. Okay, because as much as we have a couple of people from the city centre here, most of the rest of us are out in the suburbs. So Councillor Darby said that he's a ferry user. When I come into Auckland with public transport, I'm a cyclist, I'm a ferry user, and I'm a pedestrian, and that's in the one trip. On the way home, if I want to get home quicker, I'll go home by the bus. So just about all modes ticked off when I do that. However, the last part of my trip along the Whangaparāoa Peninsula can take longer than all those things put together. So I imagine that applies to Manurewa and Papakura and Henderson and other places too. So as much as I'm a diehard supporter of what's being proposed here, when we're coming back from the budget, I want to see a little bit of quid pro quo. And as much as we've got this network, we look to the wider Auckland network. So I don't want a situation where during the America's Cup, people from Whangaparāoa Peninsula and the Hibiscus Coast can't get down to the city centre because we don't run ferries in the weekend. I don't going to be too happy about that. Or if with all the wonderful investment that's occurred, when I get to my last leg of public transport use, I have to wait 40 minutes for a bus, and then the bus to get me home is another 40 minutes along Whangaparāoa. So I think our expectation is that as much as you're concentrated on that, we want a little bit of quid pro quo in the whole city centre investment. And yes, it's attracting our people, it's helping our young people going to university and all the rest of it, but let's stretch it out a bit and tie all of Auckland in so we all benefit from this.
Thank you, Meg Off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to support these recommendations and concur with the comments made by Pippa Coombe and John Watson just now. This is about adapting our city centre for the needs of the second decade of the 21st century, when we're structured to provide for the needs of the 1960s. Times have changed since the 1960s, when Tau Hanare and I used to watch people drag racing down Queen Street. You can't do that anymore, and you don't want to do it anymore. The city has changed. It's changed immeasurably. And what this consultation process has shown us is that 3 out of 4 Aucklanders who took the time to make submissions were in favour of it, and 4 out of 5 were in favour of access for everyone. You're never going to get a bigger percentage of support than that for submissions. And look, it's a little bit like High Street in two fronts. One, first of all, you need to know that you've got to set your strategy and your vision, and then to implement it, you've got to work out how to fund it. And we won't do this all overnight. We'll do it bit by bit, but we'll do the most important parts, I hope, first. And we'll make sure that it is affordable by doing it in that way. Secondly, you've got to carry people with you. And I've heard frustration from around the table about why has this taken so long. I think back, I worked in High Street for a while and it was a disaster. And yet we couldn't get that pedestrianised. It was screaming out for pedestrianisation. We changed our approach and we went for co-design, we went to carry people with us, and probably next week, Mr Chair, we will mark the second phase of pedestrianising High Street. And instead of people resisting it, they're saying, can't you do this faster? And this includes some of the businesses, to Councillor Walker's point that he made, some of the businesses saying, we were against this, but we see how well it's worked for us. Same thing happened down in Fort Street. Why do we have to do it? Because, look, in the next few years, we're going to have 500,000 walking trips a year down Queen Street. We've doubled the number of pedestrians on Queen Street. Precinct properties, to go to Councillor Simpson's point, why do we need wider footpaths and why do we constrain the traffic on Quay Street? Because there will be 10,000 people working in the precinct properties block of new developments. 10,000. More people coming from the ferries, more people coming from the cruise liners. And they don't want to have to fight their way over traffic going through. You actually don't need traffic going up Queen Street anymore. But we will change it over time, not too long, I hope, and we will change it as we see more people, far more people travelling by buses, far more people travelling by foot than travelling by car in Queen Street. So these changes are needed, and in fact, they're overdue. For those people that have said this is all, you're all anti-car, I've just got to say, I left home before 6 o'clock this morning. Took me well over an hour to drive in. You can't fit more cars on the motorway coming into town. You can't do it. We have to look at different ways of doing it. There is no major city in the world where people in the majority still travel by car into the centre of the city or even across their cities. Try doing it in London or New York. I have. I only tried once and never made that mistake again. So what else? I mean, there are co-benefits for this. Most of us that walk down Queen Street know the diesel pouring out of the buses and the fumes out of the cars. We want to make Queen Street not a place to drive through, but a place to go to. A place that's environmentally attractive, that you want to stay and linger in, you want to shop, you want to dine in, you want to enjoy yourself in. It's not that at the moment, but it could be. That's the vision of the future, and we will achieve it by adopting this paper. Look, Mr Chair, there's other points. I just want to finish on this one. It's not the city centre at the expense of the rest of the city, but let's think about the city centre for a moment. Actually, most of us that work in the city centre, including almost everybody around this table, don't live in the city centre, but we drive into it. The people coming into the city centre to enjoy it, to work in it, to study in it, come from all over our city. And secondly, this is not something in isolation about just doing up the city centre. Yes, of course, the city centre generates 20% of the GDP. Yes, of course, it's the showcase for our city to the world, to the country. But we want to also do what we have to do for the rest of the city, to take up Shane Henderson's point. You know, I look all around the city, our town centres are often old, they're past their time, they need uplifting and transforming. And that's what that program is about. And we'll do it as we're doing it in Takapuna, in Northcote, in Papatoetoe, in Onehunga, in Manukau. We will do that as well. It's not one and neglecting the other, it's doing both if we're to become a world-class city. So I endorse these recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Councillor Hills.
Thank you very much. Just want to congratulate the ADO and team for the massive amount of work done over many years on this and moving forward the direction, working together. You know, it's a fantastic job. It's visionary. It's the stuff people want and like about a city. It's the things that people notice, and it's the things that, you know, will help encourage people to live here, stay here, and be proud of our city. So I support the recommendations. Easy. We've come a long way from here. 2012 City Centre Master Plan was supported widely by the public then. This is a refresh of that. We supported this unanimously in 2018. So it's, you know, just putting that out there that we did support this direction all together then. This is the way of the future, if not the now. Cities all over the place wouldn't allow the focus or the concrete space for cars that we do. You know, in 2016, we reported that each metre of road on Queen Street is carrying 1,000 cars an hour, but each square metre of footpath is carrying 6,000 people an hour. We're not giving over the space to the people using it, and I'll keep going on about that forever. It's just about maths. It's about people. When we say we need to bring people with us, we've already got 90% of the people, because 90% of the people are wanting the space given to them because we're jammed up against each other and all around the place. Same with Key Street. You're going to have 250,000 people crossing that area in the morning and in the afternoon, and it's safety mainly, but also making that space a great place for all of us to switch over and connect and get to where we need to be, because the car is not the majority, not even close down there. The same with Queen Street. Over the last 10 years, it's probably fewer now, but the last time we looked at it, we'd reduced the cars there just by putting in a 30k zone and improving the space down there. You know, 10, 15 years ago, it's reduced by half to 20,000 now, 10,000 vehicles per day in that area. Around the city, all of us, not all of us, but many of us are coming here and using this space. It is 1% of the area, but, you know, probably a third of us at some point of the week come to this place, and we need it to be easy. Business are with us already because they know that they need to walk to their meeting, get across Queen Street, get up to Key Street, get to the university, get back down to it. They're not driving those. They're just not. If you provide things, people come. Everyone said no one on the North Shore would use public transport. 5 years ago, 2.5 million people were using the Northern Busway. This January, we cracked 8 million trips a year. That is phenomenal growth in 5 years. It's just not, you know, that's why we need the Northwestern for Linda and Shane and all their people who are crying out for a similar piece of infrastructure. But all those people are pouring into the city centre from my community and Councillor Walker and Watson's community, and just wanting to walk and get around the city. And it's not actually safe. There's not actually the space for us all at the moment to do that. So same with Councillor Simpson's community. There is brand new buses and a whole lot more connectivity. If you want to catch the bus from Mission Bay, Orake, Glen Innes train, it's 16 to 21 minutes in now, and you've got a 5 to 10 minute service. That is world class to have those kind of services already coming into the city. I know not everyone can get those, and some people need to drive and some people need their cars for work, but there'll be a lot of people in all our communities that can use these services that we're already providing. That some of this disruption, which is shown on AT's own figures, you've had a 15% reduction in cars coming into the city in the last 3 years, probably because of the disruption, but also because of the really good improvements to the public transport. And if we get everyone using it and using what we're putting in, then everyone who needs to drive from outer suburbs and places where we haven't got it right yet can come in. So I just want to say this is fantastic. I really want to move faster. I feel like in 2018, in November, when we said, cool, we all support pedestrianisation of Queen Street, it kind of would have happened or done, or we'd already be walking down there. I just think we need to do it. If you look at Wellesley at the moment, the buses are actually much better off now going down Wellesley towards Victoria Park because the cars aren't cutting through. I don't know where they went because I can look from our offices in our building and the cars are just not there. So I don't know where they went, but the buses are much better served around Victoria Park and Wellesley now just because the cars aren't jamming up the space. So we've got to keep talking about numbers of people, not the vehicles, because that is what we're using it. It's going to hurt for some people, but people change based on the fact that they have to make a different choice. If we're making it easy for driving in and you've got your free car park in your building, then you will keep driving in and you won't look to the bus stop across the road and realise it's a 5-minute service for $1.80 or $3.45 to get in here. So I think this is a transformational plan, but I really want it to be faster because people are already using the space as it should be and I think it's becoming dangerous in the city centre if we're not giving up more of the space to pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, wheelchairs, and everything else that is not a vehicle. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Councillor Newman.
Chair, in supporting the recommendations, I just want to say to Councillor Simpson that she is entitled to her caution, and she's entitled to vote for her caution. I am really in two minds myself because, frankly, I think that the effects are not fully known, they're not fully understood. I believe that there will be some negative impacts on people. I think there will be some negative impacts on businesses. I mean, we can be fast with other people's money here. We're not the ones taking the risk for ourselves. This is not our balance sheet. This is someone else's balance sheet that's going to be affected here. That's a perfectly valid argument to raise, and I thank Councillor Simpson for it. Going to Councillor Coombs' point, she is right. There have been people in the city centre paying a targeted rate for a long time. I think that they're entitled to the presumption that the targeted rate that they are paying is going to fund something, that is going to fund a transformation. I most certainly don't want to see cars up and down Queen Street. I would like to see Queen Street pedestrianised as soon as possible. But there is an impact to be had, and we ought not to just think that, well, if we can accelerate this as fast as possible, access for everyone will deliver the best possible premium outcome, and that the city centre will be truly marvellous. Transition will affect people, and it will have a negative effect on a lot of people. And I do think that there will be businesses affected. There have been businesses affected by what's happening around the City Rail link. The effect on some of those businesses has been appalling. But I actually want to just reiterate the very fair comments raised by Councillor Henderson around the issue of agglomeration. You see, access for everyone, that's a rather loaded statement, because it's not access for everyone, it's access for everyone who is lucky enough to be able to come into the city centre. There are many, many thousands of people who don't have access to the city centre, and frankly, I would like to spend a lot more time thinking about access and equitable opportunities and outcomes for the rest of Auckland, for whom transport choice isn't an option at this point because we haven't provided PT. I'm reiterating a point that I made earlier. We don't address their needs because frankly, we don't have the ability to fund it at this point in time. So we make choices and we talk about the CBD, but of course Auckland is a rather dispersed region, and there's a very good reason for that. The growth is not just in the city centre. Yes, there has been growth in the city centre, but there's an awful lot of growth outside of the city centre. I take the point that His Worship raised around what we will be doing in some of those other centres. We're not doing them in all of the centres. We are picking which centres we will go to, and we're making choices about where we will go. Fair enough, but not everybody is going to benefit from that. Some will benefit, some most definitely will not benefit. And we need to reflect on those people too. So I just want to say, Mr. Chair, that there is no problem in my mind if some colleagues have a concern which leads them to take a position that might be different from an initial position. They're entitled to do that. There are reasons for that. The arguments that have been raised by everyone around this table are valid, but this is not a decision that will have positive consequences for all. There will be some initial impacts which will be very negative for some, and access is important to people, but also to the ability of those businesses to be able to trade, who will not be able to trade because of issues of access and the customers that they're relying upon to come into the CBD. Not all those customers are going to be access the CBD. They will make decisions to go elsewhere. So we will be voting for a change that will negatively impact on some, and so I appreciate Councillor Simpson the point you've raised. It's a very fair point.
Councillor Newman, thank you. And to close the debate, Councillor Bartley.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'd like to thank and acknowledge the ADO, Auckland Transport, Panuku, for bringing this before us today. And I especially do want to acknowledge Ludo Campbell-Reid for all his work to get it to this stage. I also wanted to say I appreciated Shane Ellison's comments in our workshop and agree with Councillor Simpson that it would have been good to hear it in a kind of public forum for everyone to hear it, because it was really informative and valuable and real. I think that what this is proposing is going to be exciting. I appreciate that it's not just about the aesthetics of the city centre, and really value the outcomes there, and it will make the city centre an even, it'll make us even more proud of Auckland and the city centre. I represent an area or people that come in from the east as well. They come in by car, like myself. They come in by bike, they walk. Kids in my area jump the train to hustle in the city. So, a lot of people come here, entertainment, education. And I just wanted to say that I think it would be very important to communicate to people when we start doing more construction and stuff, of how they can get in and out of the area, because that is one of the main issues for them is, this disruption. But I want to talk about the disruption in the city of cones, and I'm not too worried about that, because at least people can see where their money is going. Yes, we're going to do more disruption, but in some countries the politicians are getting fatter because they're eating the money, and here you can see where the money is going. We're not eating it. In fact, we're getting smaller. But, well, I am. But yeah, so yeah. So, it's good. And in my area in particular, we have road cones in Glen Innes, but that's because we need that infrastructure, and it should have been done ages ago. And that's the same with this city centre master plan and the work that's going to happen here. Really love the Māori outcome, seeing that, because you're absolutely right. What distinguishes New Zealand from any other place in the world is the Māori identity, is Māori. But perhaps what's happening in the city centre can be, the lead for how we do town centre developments in our other areas in Auckland. And speaking on that, I used to think, oh my gosh, we're spending so much focus on the city centre. But actually I realise now that we're not, because we are also doing developments in other areas of Auckland in our town centres through Panuku development. So I'm good with seeing that we're not just focused here in the city, we are balancing it out. As the Disability Liaison Councillor for Council, absolutely support A4E. Access for everybody. Good to see the green space in the city coming through in the master plan. And I wanted to end with saying that people focus place, absolutely, but let's not forget the people that are living on the streets in the city centre, that we need to do more in that regard, especially given the report we just heard earlier on today regarding homelessness and trying to prevent more homelessness happening. And the phrase that I hear a lot now since I've joined council is, if you want to make an omelette, you've got to break some eggs. Yeah, but that I hear that a lot here, and I know it's going to be a little bit rough in the beginning, but we've got this vision for the city centre, and we've just got to do it. And you've done all this work, and it's just going to be amazing when it happens. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Nicely completed, and thank you to the staff. We'll go to the vote now. And now I think if we can put A and B together. So I'll put A and B to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. And if members want to record their vote, if they could see staff afterwards, that would be great. Now there's a request to take C separately, so I'll put C. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. And declare that it's too late. It's already, the vote's already been. Okay. Sorry, did I not say? Okay, it can apparently. Correct. Councillor Casey, I'll go for a division on the B. C, sorry, C. Yeah, it's just
Division on C.
Yeah, can we just change the B to a C? Sorry, we're in a division now, and I just have to proceed with the vote. That's the rule.
Voting on clause C. Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Bartley.
4.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Coon.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper. Mayor Goff.
4.
Member Hirani.
No.
Councillor Henderson.
Aye.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, but earlier, please.
Councillor Newman. Member Namani.
Yes.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Yep.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, members. That's carried 15 votes to 2. And then we'll proceed. Now, Councillor Simpson, I'm sorry I couldn't take your question at that time due to the standing orders. Is the question still relevant now?
No, I just thought Auckland Transport was
Speaker, please. Microphone, I should say.
My question was, I thought Auckland Transport had some concerns, but he was shaking his head when the vote was going through, so I thought it was all right then.
Okay, thank you. We'll proceed with the D and the E together. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried.